She waited 12 years in a diner by the roadside, unaware that the most powerful man in the city, a man feared by both politicians and mob bosses, was the boy who had vanished without a word. He had secretly bought the entire diner, preserving every detail, every old recipe, but keeping his identity hidden. Then an old police file resurfaced, revealing the brutal truth about her sister's death. That truth could destroy everything. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a comment with the name of the city you're currently reading, so I know how far my story has progressed. The grill hisses before the sun even clears the water tower, and that's the sound Delilah Mercer wakes up to most mornings, whether she's standing in the kitchen or 3 miles away in her bed with the window cracked. Habit does that to a person. 12 years of 4 a.m. alarms and the smell of bacon grease soaked into drywall will rewire a person's whole nervous system until the body starts performing the job before the mind agrees to it. She parks the Corolla in the gravel lot behind Mercer's diner, though it hasn't been Mercer's in any legal sense for 6 months now, not since the bank letter came folded in thirds. Not since she signed paperwork she barely read, because the alternative was watching the doors get padlocked in front of regulars who've been eating her eggs since Reagan was president. She doesn't think about that letter if she can help it. Doesn't think about the new ownership group with the offshore-sounding name that never sends anyone to collect rent, never raises prices, never does anything except keep paying for repairs nobody asked for. She used to lie awake wondering about that. Now she's too tired to wonder about much of anything except whether Avery ate her cereal or just stirred it into mush and called it breakfast. Inside, the linoleum is cold under her sneakers, that particular cold that says the heater clicked off sometime around 3 a.m. and nobody's paying to keep it running all night anymore. She flips the lights. The neon sign out front buzzes to life with a stutter. Same as always, the sea in Mercer's flickering like it's got something to confess. She used to find that charming. Tonight, no, morning, she corrects herself. It's morning. Focus. It just looks tired, like everything else. She gets the coffee going first. Old ritual. Her hands move without her permission. Scoop, tap, scoop. The smell rising up thick and bitter and somehow more honest than anything else in her life right now. She's 31 years old and she smells like a diner 6 days a week. And she used to have other plans. A community college acceptance letter somewhere in a box she hasn't opened since her sister died. But plans are for people whose families don't fall apart in slow motion. Avery's still asleep at the apartment 2 blocks over, curled up under the comforter with the cartoon foxes on it, 8 years old and already too sharp for her own good, already asking questions Delilah doesn't have answers for. Where's Mom? Why doesn't anyone talk about how she died? Why does Aunt Dee cry in the bathroom sometimes and pretend the faucet's just loud? Delilah doesn't have answers for any of it. She has a diner that isn't technically hers anymore, a debt she's still paying off in increments that feel like bleeding from a wound that never closes, and a kid who needs her to be steady even on the mornings when steady feels like the hardest thing in the world. The bell over the door cracks the silence at 6:15. Earl Hutchins, 70-some years old, same booth every single day since before Delilah could legally serve him coffee. He doesn't say good morning. He never has. He just grunts, settles into the cracked red vinyl, and waits for the cup to appear in front of him like it's owed to him by some cosmic contract. Cold in here, he says. Heater's temperamental. Everything around here's temperamental. He says it without malice, just an old man stating a fact about the world the way he might comment on the weather. Delilah pours, sets the pot down, doesn't argue, because he's not wrong. By 7, the place is half full. The regular churn of truckers and shift workers, and a couple of teenagers skipping first period because the diner doesn't ask questions as long as you tip. Delilah moves through it on muscle memory, plates balanced on her forearm, refills before anyone has to ask. The rhythm of it almost meditative if she lets it be. This is the only place in the world where she still feels like she knows exactly what she's doing. She doesn't notice the black car at first, doesn't notice it parked across the street, engine running, windows tinted dark enough that the morning light just slides off the glass without giving anything back. She's too busy refilling Earl's cup and dodging a question from one of the truckers about whether the pie case is fresh today, which it is, because she made it herself at 11 last night after Avery finally went down. It's Marisol who notices. Marisol's worked the counter with her for 4 years, has a kid of her own and a husband who drinks more than he should, and she's got the kind of eyes that catch things other people miss because she's spent a lifetime needing to know who's a threat before they get close. "Dee," she says, low, jerking her chin toward the window. "That car's been sitting there 20 minutes. Delilah glances over. The car doesn't move, doesn't do anything except sit there with its engine running like it's waiting for a decision to get made somewhere inside it. "Probably someone's boyfriend," Delilah says, because that's easier than the alternative, and she's got 6 more tables and a coffee pot running low and a kid to pick up from before-school care in 40 minutes. She doesn't have room in her morning for mystery cars. The car pulls away eventually. She forgets about it by the time the lunch rush hits. She shouldn't have forgotten about it. She'll think about that later, replay the moment, wonder if there was a version of that morning where she walked outside and knocked on the tinted window and demanded to know who was watching her diner like it owed them something. But hindsight's a luxury nobody gets to spend in real time. What she doesn't know, what she has no possible way of knowing, because the man behind that glass made absolutely certain of it, is that the car belongs to Ronan Viscari. That the man sitting in the back seat hasn't slept properly in 3 nights because every time he closes his eyes, he sees the same booth, the same cracked vinyl, the same woman moving through a room like she built it with her own hands. Which she did. Which is exactly why he can't make himself walk through that door. Ronan Viscari is 33 years old, and he has not been called by his real name in any room that mattered for over a decade. In the rooms that matter, he's referred to with a kind of careful, fearful formality. "Mr. Viscari, sir," the boss, occasionally just him, said with a lowered voice like saying it louder might summon something. He runs an empire that touches docks and warehouses and half the import contracts on the eastern seaboard, an empire built on the bones of an organization his father ran before him and his uncle ran before that, an organization soaked so deep in blood that Ronan stopped trying to count the bodies somewhere around his 24th birthday. He didn't choose this life. That's the lie he used to tell himself, back when he still bothered lying to himself about it. The truth is uglier, and he knows it now. Knows it the way you know a scar by touch in the dark. He didn't choose it, but he stayed in it, built himself into something hard and untouchable, because the alternative was being the soft kid who got swallowed whole the night his father bled out on a warehouse floor with 3 bullets in him and Ronan, 16 years old, standing close enough to feel the warmth leave the man's hands. That was the night everything ended. That was the night Delilah Mercer's father, a man Ronan still thinks about with something between guilt and grief he's never been able to name, was the one who found him afterward, sitting in the dark behind the very diner he's parked outside of right now, shaking so hard his teeth clattered. That was the man who pulled him inside, sat him in a booth, put a plate of food in front of him he never ate, and didn't ask a single question because some things don't need asking. That was also, by extension, the world that made Delilah. 16-year-old Delilah, working the register after school, who found Ronan sitting in that same booth 3 weeks later and didn't flinch at the look in his eyes, the kind of look that should have sent any sane person running. She sat down across from him instead. Didn't say anything for a long time, eventually asked if he wanted pie. He did not, in fact, want pie. He ate it anyway because she put it in front of him, and something about the way she did it made refusing feel impossible. That was the beginning of 2 years that Ronan still, even now, even after everything, considers the only uncomplicated happiness he's ever had. 2 years of sneaking out after the diner closed, sitting on the roof of her father's truck, talking about nothing and everything, falling into something that felt less like falling and more like finally landing somewhere solid after years of free fall. He told her things he never told anyone else. She never once looked at him like he was already a dead man walking, which is how most people in his orbit had started looking at him by then. And then his uncle's organization came apart at the seams in a single violent week, the kind of internal collapse that takes out half a dozen men and leaves the survivors scrambling for power. And 17-year-old Ronan disappeared in the middle of it without a word to anyone, including her, especially her, because the men hunting what remained of his bloodline would have killed her in a heartbeat, just to make a point. He told himself that was protection. He still tells himself that. Some nights it even feels true. He spent the next 12 years becoming someone else. A name nobody could trace back to a scared kid in a diner booth. A reputation built brick by brick on violence he doesn't enjoy, but has gotten frighteningly efficient at. He clawed his way to the top of an empire that should have killed him a dozen times over, and somewhere in that climb, he started having people watch the diner. Quietly, carefully, just to know she was alive, just to know she was safe. He found out about her sister's death 8 years ago through a report that crossed his desk in the most mundane way imaginable, buried in a stack of incident summaries his people compiled out of habit. A robbery gone wrong. A woman shot in a parking garage. No suspects. Case closed within a month for lack of evidence. He remembers staring at the name for almost a full minute before it landed. Remembers the specific sick lurch in his chest. Remembers thinking, even then, that the case closing that fast smelled wrong, the way a locked door smells wrong when you know there should be noise coming from the other side of it. He didn't investigate it then. He tells himself there were reasons. He was still consolidating power, still putting down rivals who wanted him dead before he turned 26, still learning which of his father's old lieutenants could be trusted and which ones were waiting for an opening to put a knife in his back. All true. None of it forgivable, not really, not to the version of himself that still remembers sitting across from her in that booth feeling like a person instead of a weapon. 6 months ago, when the diner's mortgage came up for refinancing and the bank was circling like it smelled blood in the water, he bought the whole property through 3 shell companies and a 4th that exists purely to make the first 3 harder to trace. He told his people to make sure nothing about the diner ever changed. Same staff, same hours, same cracked vinyl in the same booth he used to sit in, and to make sure Delilah never found out who'd bought it. He told himself this, too, was protection. He's starting to understand that protection and cowardice can look exactly the same from the inside. The car pulls away from the curb because Ronan finally says the word, low, almost a whisper, and his driver, a broad, silent man named Castellano, who's been with him since before he had any business being trusted with anything, pulls into traffic without comment. Ronan watches the diner shrink in the side mirror until it's gone, swallowed by the next block, and he sits there with his jaw tight and his hands flat on his knees like he's trying to keep them from doing something he hasn't decided on yet. "You're not going to keep doing this," Castellano says. Not a question. Doing what? Sitting outside, watching, driving away. Ronan doesn't answer right away. Out the window, the city slides past in its ordinary grayness, people walking to jobs that don't involve burying bodies or laundering money through shipping manifests, people who get to live lives where the worst thing that happens to them is a bad commute. He used to envy that. He stopped letting himself feel things like envy because feelings like that get a man killed in his line of work. Distraction is a luxury, and luxuries cost lives, usually not his own. There's something happening with the sister's case, Ronan says instead, because it's easier to talk about that than about the ache sitting under his ribs every time he sees her through tinted glass and can't make himself walk through the door. "Files I asked for last month, they finally came back." Castellano's eyes flick to the rear view. And it wasn't a robbery. Ronan's voice goes flat in the way it does when he's holding something down hard. The parking garage. The timing. The fact that nothing was taken off her. Not her purse. Not her jewelry. Not the cash in her wallet. Somebody made it look like a robbery because that's easier to close. Real robberies don't leave $400 sitting in an open bag next to the body. Castellano doesn't say anything for a moment. He's been in this business long enough to know what that kind of detail means. The specific, deliberate cruelty of staging a killing to look like random bad luck. "You think it connects back," Castellano finally says. "I think," Ronan says, and the words taste like ash coming out of his mouth, "that the report I read 8 years ago was filed by someone who works for me, and I think whoever wrote it knew exactly what they were covering up." The car goes quiet, except for the tick of the turn signal as they merge onto the avenue that'll take them back toward the warehouses, back toward the part of his life that has nothing to do with cracked vinyl booths or pie, nobody asked for, or a woman who still, after 12 years, hasn't given up on a diner that should have buried her financially years ago. He thinks about Avery too, though he's never met her, never been allowed to meet her, a niece by blood that isn't his blood at all, but who he's watched grow up through photographs his people have quietly collected. Birthday parties, a school play where she played a tree and looked deeply unhappy about it, A hospital visit 2 years back that turned out to be nothing more than a bad case of strep throat, but had sent Ronan's pulse into something close to panic when the report crossed his desk. He doesn't know the kid. He feels somehow responsible for her anyway, the way a man feels responsible for a fire he didn't start, but could have put out earlier if he'd just walked through one particular door at the right moment in his life. Back at the diner, Delilah doesn't think about the black car again until almost 3 in the afternoon, in the dead hour between lunch and the early dinner crowd, when she's wiping down the counter and Marisol brings it up out of nowhere. "You ever wonder," Marisol says, stacking clean mugs, "who actually owns this place now?" Delilah's rag stops moving for half a second before she forces it back into motion. "Why would I wonder that? It's not like it matters. Rent gets paid, repairs get made, nobody bothers me. I don't ask questions about a gift horse." "It's not a gift horse, Dee. It's a building. Buildings have owners. Owners usually want something. Maybe this one just wants the diner to keep running. Nobody just wants that. Not for free. Not for 6 months straight without so much as a phone call." Marisol sets the last mug down harder than necessary. "It's weird. You know it's weird." Delilah does know. She's known for months, has lain awake more nights than she'd admit turning it over. The unsigned repair invoices, the rent that gets paid automatically from some account she's never been given access to. The single time she tried calling the number on the original paperwork and got a recording that informed her the line was no longer in service. She's chosen, deliberately, not to dig deeper because some part of her, the tired, frightened part that's been holding the whole world together with both hands since her sister died, is terrified that digging will mean losing this place entirely. Better an unanswered mystery than an answer that takes the diner away. "I don't have the energy to be paranoid about good luck," she says finally. "I've got enough bad luck to manage." Marisol doesn't push it further, but the look she gives Delilah says she's not done thinking about it, not by a long shot. The afternoon stretches on, customers trickling in and out, the radio behind the counter cycling through the same 6 classic rock songs it's played since Delilah was a kid, sneaking sips of root beer behind that very counter. She picks Avery up at 4, the two of them walking the 2 blocks home with Avery chattering about a science project involving baking soda and vinegar that her teacher promised would be, quote, "the coolest thing you've ever seen." And Delilah nods along, asks the right questions, manages to be present in a way that costs her more energy than she has left in reserve. It's after Avery's asleep, after the dishes are done and the apartment's gone quiet except for the hum of the ancient refrigerator, that Delilah finally lets herself sit down at the kitchen table with the box she hasn't opened in years. She doesn't know what makes tonight different. Maybe it's the car. Maybe it's Marisol's question needling at something she'd rather not examine. Maybe it's just one of those nights where the weight of everything gets too heavy to hold without looking backward for a minute, just to remember there was a version of her life that didn't feel like drowning in slow motion. Inside the box, a community college acceptance letter she never used, a photo of her and her sister Caitlin, maybe 15 years old in the picture, arms slung around each other outside the diner, both of them laughing at something lost to time. And underneath that, folded so many times the creases have gone soft as fabric, a photo Delilah hasn't looked at in over a decade. Herself at 17, sitting in a diner booth across from a boy with dark eyes and a jaw that always looked too tense for someone his age. The two of them not looking at the camera, looking at each other instead, in a way that makes something in Delilah's chest crack open even now, even after everything. Even after he became nothing but a closed file in the back of her mind labeled gone, presumed dead, never coming back. She doesn't cry. She's cried enough over Ronan Viscari to last several lifetimes, back when she was 18 and convinced herself for almost a year that he'd come back, that there was an explanation, that the boy who used to talk to her like she was the only steady thing in his entire collapsing world wouldn't just vanish without a word unless something had truly, permanently ended him. She stopped believing that eventually, had to, just to survive her own 20s. She puts the photo back in the box, puts the box back on the closet shelf, goes to bed telling herself this is just an ordinary kind of restlessness, nothing more, the kind that comes from working too many hours and sleeping too few of them. She doesn't know that 3 miles away, in an office on the top floor of a building with his name on none of the paperwork, Ronan Viscari is staring at a folder that's just been placed in front of him by a man named Salvatore Greco, his late father's oldest surviving lieutenant, the man Ronan has trusted with more secrets than anyone alive. "You wanted everything we had on the parking garage shooting," Greco says, sliding the folder across the desk. "8 years back. The Mercer woman." Ronan's hand goes still on the desk for a moment before he opens it. Inside, surveillance logs nobody should have had reason to keep. A name redacted so heavily, it's clear someone wanted it gone forever. And a date, 3 days before the shooting, logging a private meeting between Caitlin Mercer and a man whose initials, even blacked out as thoroughly as they are, Ronan recognizes instantly, because he's seen those same initials signed at the bottom of contracts that move through his organization every single week. The floor of his stomach drops out entirely. "Sal," he says, very quietly, the kind of quiet that makes Greco's spine go rigid, because he's worked for this family long enough to know exactly what that tone means. "Tell me this isn't who I think it is." Greco doesn't answer right away. And in the silence that stretches out between them, thick and suffocating, Ronan understands with total, sickening clarity that the man responsible for Caitlin Mercer's death isn't some outside threat, isn't a rival organization, isn't bad luck or random violence at all. It's someone sitting close enough to him right now to have his hand on Ronan's own shoulder at family dinners. Someone who has stood beside him in rooms where lives were decided with a glance. Someone Ronan has trusted, completely, without question, for years. And whoever it is has no idea that Ronan just found the thread that's about to unravel everything. Greco still hasn't answered, and the silence is doing more damage than any words could. Ronan watches the older man's throat work, watches the muscles along his jaw tighten and release, like he's chewing on something he can't bring himself to swallow. "Sal," Ronan's voice comes out low, controlled, the kind of controlled that scares people who know him well, because it means he's burning something down on the inside to keep the outside this calm. "I asked you a question." "I don't know who it is." Greco says it too fast. That's the tell. A man who's spent 30 years in this business doesn't answer fast unless he's trying to outrun the truth before it catches up to his own mouth. Ronan stands, doesn't raise his voice, doesn't slam anything, just rises from the chair slow and deliberate, the way a man moves when he's deciding whether violence is worth the cleanup afterward. "You handed me this folder. You're the one man in this organization who'd know whose initials those are, because you're the one man who's been signing contracts at my side for 20 years. So I'll ask you again, and I want you to think real hard about what happens to you in this building if I find out later you lied to my face." Greco's hands, spotted with age, flatten against his thighs. "I swear on everything I have left, Ronan. I don't know for certain. I've got a guess. A bad one. But a guess isn't a name you can put a bullet behind." "Give me the guess." "Costanzo." The name lands in the room like a dropped glass, and for a second neither of them moves, like they're both waiting to see how many pieces it shattered into. Dominic Costanzo, underboss. The man who stood at Ronan's father's funeral with his hand on 16-year-old Ronan's shoulder and told him, in a voice thick with grief that Ronan had believed was real for over a decade, that he'd protect this family with his own life if it came to that. The man who'd helped him consolidate power in the bloody years after his uncle's collapse, who'd talked down rivals, who'd sat across from Ronan at 1,000 dinners, and never once given him a reason to look twice. "That's not a guess," Ronan says. "That's an accusation. It's both. It has to stay both until we know more, or you're going to walk into a war you can't win yet." Greco's voice drops, urgent now, leaning forward over the desk. "Costanzo's got loyalty built into half this organization. Men who came up under him, who owe him favors going back 15 years. You move on him without proof airtight enough to choke a courtroom, and you don't just lose a fight. You split this whole family in half. People die. A lot of people. People who got nothing to do with any of this." Ronan's hands curl into fists at his sides, slow, deliberate, like he's testing how much pressure his own knuckles can take before something cracks. "A woman is dead, Sal. 8 years dead. Because she saw something she wasn't supposed to see, and somebody decided her life was worth less than whatever that meeting was protecting." "I know." Her sister's been raising a kid alone on a diner waitress's salary because the case got closed in under a month for lack of evidence. Lack of evidence that somebody manufactured. I know, Ronan. Greco says it quiet, almost gentle, the closest thing to gentleness the old man's voice has produced in years. I knew Caitlin Mercer too, you understand. Watched her grow up, same as I watched you and her sister grow up. I'm not telling you to let it go. I'm telling you that if you go in loud, you're going to get the truth buried so deep we'll never dig it back up, and you're going to get good men killed doing it. Ronan turns away from him, walks to the window, looks out over a skyline he's owned a piece of since he was 25 years old and has never once felt like it belonged to him. His reflection stares back at him in the glass, hollow-eyed, jaw tight enough to ache. He thinks about Delilah's face the last time he let himself really look at it up close, 12 years ago, the night before everything fell apart. And he thinks about how she doesn't know any of this is happening, doesn't know the ground under her entire life is about to shift. And some old, useless part of him still wants to protect her from it the way he's been protecting her from a distance for over a decade. That instinct, he's starting to understand, has already cost people everything. Protecting her from a distance is what let this go unanswered for 8 years. Protecting her from a distance is what let Costanzo, if it is Costanzo, sit comfortable at family dinners while a woman's killer walked free and her sister buried herself alive in grief and debt. I need eyes on Costanzo, Ronan says, still facing the window. Quiet ones. Men he wouldn't think twice about, men who've got no history with him. And I need everything we have on that parking garage pulled and gone through line by line, phone records, financials, anything that connects him to that night specifically, not just to the meeting 3 days before. That's going to take time. Then we take time. Ronan finally turns back around, and whatever softness might have lived in his face a moment ago is gone now, replaced with something flat and cold that Greco has only seen a handful of times in 20 years, usually right before someone stopped breathing. But I want you to hear me on this, Sal. However long it takes, I am not letting this die quiet the way her sister did. Whoever did this is going to answer for it, personally, to me. Greco nods slowly, and for the first time in the conversation, something like relief flickers across his weathered face, like he's been waiting years for someone to finally say those words out loud. Across the city, in a part of town that doesn't have valet parking or top-floor offices, Delilah is having an entirely different kind of confrontation, one with considerably lower stakes and considerably more shouting. You can't keep doing the register and the grill at the same time, Dee. You're going to burn your hand off again. Marisol's standing with her arms crossed, blocking the narrow path between the counter and the kitchen window, like she's physically prepared to stop Delilah from going back there. I've got it handled. You don't have it handled. You've got a Band-Aid on your wrist from Tuesday that says otherwise. Marisol's voice rises a notch, not quite yelling, but close, the kind of volume that comes from genuine worry dressed up as irritation, because irritation's easier to express than fear. Hire somebody. I keep telling you, there's kids in this neighborhood who'd take a dishwashing shift and be grateful for it. With what money, Marisol? The words come out sharper than Delilah intends, sharp enough that a trucker 2 booths down glances up from his eggs. She lowers her voice but doesn't lower the edge in it. You think I haven't thought about hiring somebody? Every dollar that comes through this place either goes to Avery or goes to keeping the lights on. There's nothing left over for a payroll line that isn't already spoken for. Then let me pick up an extra shift. You've already got 3 jobs, Mari. I'm not going to let you run yourself into the ground for my diner. It's not your diner, though, is it? The words are out of Marisol's mouth before she seems to fully register saying them, and the second they land, something shifts in the air between the 2 women, something that's been sitting unspoken for months, finally getting dragged into daylight. Marisol's face goes a little pale. Dee, I didn't mean... No, say it. Finish it. Delilah's standing very still now, the coffee pot frozen halfway to a cup, her knuckles white around the handle. You think I don't know that? You think I don't lie awake every single night doing math on a place I signed away the legal ownership of? I know exactly whose diner this is on paper. I just don't know whose name is on that paper because whoever it is has made damn sure I never find out. That's what worries me. Marisol steps closer, voice dropping, urgent now instead of accusatory. Don't you think that's strange? Somebody buys this place, keeps everybody on, pays for every single repair without being asked, and never shows their face or sends so much as a letter? People who do that for charity, Dee, they don't exist. Not in this city, not in this life. People who do that want something, and the not knowing what is the scariest part. Delilah sets the coffee pot down harder than she means to, the glass clacking against the burner plate loud enough that Earl Hutchins glances over from his booth, with the particular alertness of an old man who's seen enough bar fights in his life to recognize the early stages of one. What do you want me to do about it, Mari? Hire a private investigator on a waitress's tips? Confront a P.O. box that doesn't answer? I've got an 8-year-old at home who just started asking why her mother's gone and not coming back. And you want me to spend my 1 free hour a week chasing ghosts about who owns the building I work in? I want you to be careful. Marisol's voice cracks slightly on the last word, and that crack does more to cut through Delilah's anger than anything she's said so far. That's all. I've watched you hold this whole world together with both hands for years, and I'm scared one day something's going to come through that door that you can't outwork, outtip, or outstubborn your way past. And I don't want to be standing here when it happens, watching you not see it coming because you were too busy keeping this place alive to look up. The two women stand there for a long moment, the diner humming around them with its ordinary noise, bacon popping on the grill, the radio playing something tinny and forgotten from 20 years back, Earl's spoon clinking against his cup. Delilah's chest is heaving slightly, more from the argument than any physical exertion, and she realizes her eyes are stinging in a way that has nothing to do with onions. I can't afford to be scared right now, she finally says, quieter. If I let myself be scared about every loose thread in my life, I'm not going to be able to function long enough to keep Avery fed. So I lock it down. I keep moving. That's the only thing that's worked so far. Marisol doesn't argue further. She just reaches out, squeezes Delilah's forearm once, hard, and goes back to her side of the counter without another word, leaving the air between them not fully resolved, but at least breathable again. That night, after the dinner rush thins out and the booths empty one by one, Delilah finds herself doing inventory in the back room, counting cans of tomatoes and bags of flour with a clipboard she barely needs because she's had these numbers memorized for years. It's mindless work, the kind that lets her brain wander somewhere it usually isn't allowed to go during business hours. And tonight it wanders straight back to the photograph she pulled out of the box last night, Ronan's dark eyes staring at 17-year-old her across a diner booth that probably still has the same cracked vinyl right now, 12 feet away through a door she hasn't bothered closing. She doesn't hear Avery's babysitter, a college kid named Priya, who watches Avery on the nights Delilah closes, calling from the front until the second time, her voice sharper. Delilah! Phone for you! Delilah blinks back into the present, sets the clipboard down, walks out to the counter where Priya's holding the diner's ancient corded phone out like it's something unpleasant. Some guy, wouldn't give his name, said it's about the building. Something cold drops through Delilah's stomach. She takes the phone slow, presses it to her ear. This is Delilah. The voice on the other end is male, unfamiliar, businesslike in a way that immediately makes the hair on her arms stand up. Ms. Mercer, I apologize for the late call. I represent the firm handling the property's holdings. I wanted to reach out personally regarding an inquiry that's been made about the diner's ownership structure. What kind of inquiry? A pause. The kind of pause that feels deliberate, like the man on the other end is choosing his next words with the care of someone who's been told exactly how much he's allowed to say. There's no need for concern. We simply wanted to inform you that there's been increased attention on the property in recent weeks, and we wanted you to be aware in case you notice anything unusual. Additional foot traffic, vehicles, that sort of thing. Increased attention from who? I'm not at liberty to discuss that, Ms. Mercer. I'd simply ask that you contact us immediately if you observe anything that concerns you, anything at all. There's a number on the original lease documentation. That number doesn't work. I tried it months ago. Another pause, longer this time. I apologize for the inconvenience. I'll have that corrected. A click, soft and final, and the line goes dead before Delilah can ask a single one of the dozen questions crowding up her throat. She stands there holding the receiver for a long moment, the dial tone buzzing flat and empty in her ear, And when she finally hangs it up, her hand is trembling slightly, just enough that she notices, just enough that she has to press her palm flat against the counter to steady it. "Everything okay?" Priya asks, already halfway back toward the door, more curious than alarmed. "Fine," Delilah says, the lie coming out automatic, well-practiced, the same reflex that's gotten her through every hard year since Caitlin died. Wrong number, basically. It wasn't a wrong number, she knows that. She's known something has been circling her life for months now, something with money and patience and no interest in showing its face, and tonight it finally got close enough that she could hear its voice, even if she couldn't see it. 3 miles away, in the same office where the confrontation with Greco played out hours earlier, Ronan is staring at a phone screen, having just hung up himself, having just listened to his own man relay every word of that call back to him in real time through an earpiece, and his hands are shaking in a way that has nothing to do with fear of violence and everything to do with the sound of her voice, sharper now than he remembers it, worn down at the edges in a way that makes something in his chest physically hurt. "You didn't have to call her," Castellano says from the doorway, arms crossed, watching his boss with the particular concern of a man who spent a decade learning to read every shift in Ronan's mood before it becomes dangerous. "I needed her to know something's happening, without telling her what." Ronan sets the phone down, presses the heels of his hands against his eyes. If Costanzo's people figure out we're closing in, and they realize she's connected, that diner's the first place they'd look to send a message. So tell her the truth, all of it. Walk through that door and tell her who you are. And then what? She finds out the man who disappeared on her at 17 has spent 12 years running the same kind of organization that might have had her sister killed? Ronan's voice cracks on the last word, just barely, just enough that Castellano's expression softens. "She's not going to see protection in that, Cass. She's going to see exactly what I am. A man up to his neck in the same blood that took her sister from her. She deserves to know regardless, especially if there's danger coming." Ronan doesn't answer right away. He's thinking about the photograph he keeps in the locked drawer of this very desk, the one his men took 8 years ago. The only photo he's ever allowed himself to keep of her. Delilah laughing at something off camera outside the diner, unaware she was being watched, unaware that 1,200 miles of careful distance and silence was the only gift a man like him knew how to give the people he loved. "Pull every man we have off other assignments," he says finally, voice flat, decision made. "I want a security perimeter around that diner inside 48 hours. Quiet. She doesn't see a single uniform, doesn't see a single car that looks out of place. And get me everything Costanzo's touched in the last 2 weeks. Meetings, calls, anything." Castellano nods, turns to leave, then stops at the door. "And the woman?" Ronan's jaw works. "I'll handle the woman." He doesn't, not that night. He sits alone in his office until almost 3 in the morning, the city lights smearing gold and red across the window glass, turning the photograph over and over in his hands like it might give him an answer it's never going to give. The next 2 days pass for Delilah in the kind of blur that comes from working double shifts on too little sleep, snapping at Avery over something small and immediately regretting it, lying awake replaying the phone call until the words lose all meaning. She doesn't tell Marisol about it. Some instinct tells her that voicing it out loud will make it more real than she can handle right now, will force her to actually confront the fact that someone with money and reach has been circling her life for months and has finally decided to let her know it. It's the 3rd morning when everything cracks wide open. She's unlocking the diner same as always, key in the lock, sky still that pale pre-dawn gray, when she notices the door isn't locked the way she left it. The deadbolt's already disengaged. Her stomach drops as she pushes the door open slow, every instinct screaming at her to call someone, call anyone. But her hand finds the light switch out of pure muscle memory before her brain catches up to what her body's already doing. The lights flicker on. Nothing's broken. Nothing's stolen, as far as she can immediately tell. The register's untouched. The pie case is intact. The booths are exactly where they're supposed to be. But sitting in the center of the counter, placed there deliberately, precisely, is a single manila envelope with her name written across it in handwriting she's never seen before, sharp and slanted and unmistakably masculine. She stares at it for a long moment before she finds the nerve to pick it up. Her hands are shaking again, worse than they were on the phone, and she has to set it down twice before she manages to get the flap open. Inside is a single photograph, old, slightly creased from handling, of a man and a woman standing close together outside the diner at night. A man she doesn't immediately recognize, his face turned mostly away from the camera, deep in conversation with a woman whose face is fully visible, whose face Delilah would recognize anywhere on earth because she spent every day for the better part of a decade looking into it across the breakfast table. Caitlin, her sister. Younger in the photo, maybe 23, 24, standing outside this very diner at what looks like close to midnight, talking to a man whose identity has been deliberately, carefully obscured. Beneath the photograph, on a single typed slip of paper, 4 words sit, centered on the page like an accusation. She knew the truth. Delilah's knees go weak enough that she has to grab the counter to keep from going down. Behind her, the bell over the door cracks the silence, and she spins around fast enough to send the photograph sliding off the counter, her heart slamming so hard against her ribs she can hear it in her own ears, fully expecting to find a stranger standing in the doorway. It's not a stranger. It's a man she hasn't seen in 12 years, standing in the gray pre-dawn light, with his hand still on the door handle, his jaw tense the exact same way it always used to be, his eyes locked on hers with an expression she doesn't have a name for. Not yet, not until the words finally claw their way up out of her throat, and she realizes, with a horror that swallows the whole room whole, exactly who's standing in front of her. Ronan. His name comes out broken, barely a whisper, 12 years of grief and rage and unanswered questions collapsing into a single syllable. You're supposed to be dead. He doesn't move from the doorway, doesn't say a single word in response. He just stands there, breathing hard like he's run the whole way here, his eyes flicking once, fast, to the photograph lying face up on the floor between them, to her sister's face frozen mid-conversation with a man whose identity neither of them has any choice left but to finally confront. Neither of them moves for what feels like a full minute, though it can't be more than 3 or 4 seconds, the kind of stretched, suffocating time that only exists in the worst moments of a person's life. The bell above the door is still trembling faintly on its bracket. Somewhere behind Delilah, the coffee maker clicks and starts its automatic morning cycle, hissing steam into a silence neither of them seems capable of breaking. It's Ronan who moves first. He steps inside, slow, hands visible, the way a man moves when he's trying not to spook something wounded, and bends down to pick up the photograph from the floor without taking his eyes off her, like he's afraid that if he looks away, even for a second, she'll either run or come at him with the nearest blunt object. Don't, Delilah says, and her voice comes out rawer than she intends, more animal than words. Don't touch that. Don't touch anything in here. He freezes, half crouched, the photograph still on the floor between his fingers and the linoleum. Delilah, 12 years. She says it like it's the only sentence she has left in her whole body. 12 years, Ronan. I went to the police. I called hospitals. I sat across from a detective who told me, very kindly, that boys like you sometimes just disappear, that I should consider the possibility you didn't want to be found. And I told him he was wrong. I told him you wouldn't do that to me. And then I spent the next decade slowly understanding that maybe he wasn't wrong at all. He was wrong. Ronan straightens, the photograph still in his hand, and there's something in his face now that looks almost like physical pain, like the words cost him something to push out. I didn't disappear because I wanted to. Then why? She's not crying. She refuses to cry. Not now, not in front of him. Not when she can feel something underneath the grief starting to harden into pure fury. Why does a 17-year-old boy vanish without one single word to the girl he supposedly... Why does he just go silent for 12 years and let her think he's dead? Because the people who killed my father were still hunting what was left of my family that week, and if they'd known there was a girl I cared about, they would have used you to get to me. They would have hurt you, Delilah, slowly, on purpose, just to watch what it did to me. His voice cracks on the last few words, the first real crack she's heard in it since he walked through the door. I left because the alternative was you ending up exactly like... He stops himself. Too late. The unfinished sentence hangs in the air between them, and Delilah's whole body goes cold in a way that has nothing to do with the diner's broken heater. Exactly like what, Ronan? Her voice has gone very quiet, very dangerous, the kind of quiet that comes right before something breaks completely. Finish that sentence. He doesn't answer. His silence is answer enough, and Delilah feels something inside her chest cave in like a building losing its foundation all at once. You knew. The words come out of her like they're being dragged from somewhere deep and physical. You knew something about Caitlin. You've known this whole time. I didn't know anything until 3 days ago. He says it fast, urgent, taking a step toward her that she immediately matches with a step back, putting the counter between them like a wall. Delilah, I swear to you, I had no idea your sister's death was connected to anything until a file landed on my desk 72 hours ago, and the second I understood what I was looking at, I came straight here. Connected to what? She's shaking now, full body, the adrenaline finally breaking through the shock. Connected to what, Ronan? Who are you? What do you even do that a file lands on your desk about my sister's murder 8 years after the police told me it was a random robbery? He sets the photograph down on the counter, very carefully, like it weighs more than paper should. And when he looks back up at her, his eyes are doing something she's never seen them do before, not even in the worst of their teenage years, not even the night before he vanished. They look like a man standing at the edge of something he can't walk back from. My father ran an organization, he says, and each word comes out like it's been pulled through gravel. After he died, my uncle ran it. After my uncle's people tore each other apart fighting over what was left, I ended up running it. I've spent 12 years building it into something bigger and more careful than either of them ever managed, and I have done things in that time that I will never be able to explain to you in a way that makes them sound like anything other than what they are. The silence that follows is total. Even the coffee maker seems to have gone quiet, though it hasn't. Not really. It's just that Delilah's entire awareness has narrowed down to the man standing 8 feet away from her, telling her, in plain language, exactly what she's spent 12 years refusing to let herself suspect. You're a criminal, she says finally, flat, like she's testing the shape of the word in her own mouth. I'm worse than that. He says it without flinching, without trying to soften it, and somehow that honesty is more unbearable than any excuse would have been. I'm the man at the top of an organization that has hurt people, Delilah, has killed people. I didn't build it to be that way out of choice. I built it because the only alternative was being killed myself the day my father died, and I was 16 years old and terrified, and I chose to survive instead of being noble about it. I have spent every day since telling myself that surviving was worth whatever it cost. And now you're telling me my sister might be one of the costs. He doesn't answer that directly. He doesn't have to. The way his face goes gray, the way his jaw works like he's physically trying to hold something down, says everything his mouth won't. There's a man in my organization, he finally says, voice barely above a whisper now. Dominic Costanzo, underboss. He's been at my side since I was 16 years old, helped me survive the worst year of my life, helped me hold the organization together when half of it wanted me dead just for being my father's son. 3 days ago, a file came across my desk showing that Caitlin met with someone connected to my world 3 days before she was killed. The initials on the contact log match his. Delilah's hand finds the edge of the counter and grips it hard enough that her knuckles go white. Why would my sister be meeting with anyone in your world? I don't know yet. That's the truth. I don't have the full picture, but I have a guess, and it's the only thing that makes sense of every piece I've found so far. Ronan takes a slow breath, and when he speaks again, his voice has gone careful, deliberate, like a man laying out evidence he wishes desperately wasn't true. Caitlin worked nights at a financial services office downtown before she died. I checked the records this morning. That office handled accounts for 3 shell companies that route money through my organization's shipping contracts. If she saw something in those books she wasn't supposed to see, a discrepancy, a name that shouldn't have been there, and she went looking for answers from the wrong person, then somebody had her killed to keep her quiet. Delilah finishes the sentence for him because she can't bear to hear him say it, and even hearing herself say it doesn't make it feel real. Doesn't make the room stop tilting slightly under her feet. And the case got buried in under a month because whoever did it had the police on a leash. I think so. Yes. The diner door swings open behind them without warning. the bell cracking through the tension like a gunshot, and both of them spin toward it fast. Ronan's hand moving instinctively toward his jacket, in a motion so smooth and practiced it makes Delilah's stomach turn over, before they both realize it's only Marisol, arriving early for her shift, stopping dead in the doorway at the sight of a strange man standing far too close to her best friend in an otherwise empty diner. "Dee?" Marisol's eyes flick between them, taking in Delilah's pale face, the photograph on the counter, the stranger whose hand is just now easing away from his jacket like he's remembering himself. "Everything okay in here?" "Get Avery," Delilah says, and her own voice surprises her with how steady it sounds, even though everything inside her feels like it's been put through a shredder. "Right now. Go to the apartment, get her, bring her here, don't let her out of your sight." "Dee, you're scaring me." "Just do it. Please." Something in Delilah's tone must communicate the real weight of the request, because Marisol doesn't argue further, just gives Ronan one last suspicious, assessing look before turning and walking back out the door at a near run. Once she's gone, Delilah turns back to Ronan, and the fear that was cracking her voice a second ago has hardened into something colder, sharper. "If there's a man in your organization who had my sister killed to protect a money trail, and he finds out you're investigating him, he'll know I'm getting close. Yes. And what does a man like that do, Ronan, when he knows someone's getting close?" Her voice rises now, finally breaking past the careful control she's been holding on to since he walked through the door. "What does he do when the person getting close has a niece who's 8 years old and goes to school 3 blocks from here every single day?" Ronan doesn't answer right away, and the silence is its own answer, the worst possible answer, and Delilah watches something close down behind his eyes like a door slamming on instinct. "I already moved on it," he says. "I've had a security detail watching this diner for 2 days. I'll have eyes on Avery's school inside the hour." "You've been watching this diner for 2 days and you didn't think to tell me." "I didn't know how to walk through that door, Delilah." For the first time since he arrived, his voice cracks completely, all the careful control finally giving way. "I have rehearsed 100 different versions of this conversation in my head for years, and not one of them ended with me standing here telling you that the man who might have had your sister killed has had his hand on my shoulder at family dinners for a decade. I didn't know how to tell you any of this without you looking at me exactly the way you're looking at me right now." "How am I looking at you?" "Like I'm one of them." The accusation sits there between them, unanswered, because the honest truth is Delilah doesn't entirely know how to look at him right now, doesn't know if the boy she loved at 17 and the man standing in front of her confessing to running a criminal empire are even the same person anymore, or if grief and time and violence carve something entirely new out of what used to be Ronan Viscari. Her phone buzzes in her apron pocket before she can find an answer. She pulls it out with hands that haven't fully stopped shaking, sees Marisol's name on the screen, and something in the urgency of the buzzing itself makes her stomach drop before she's even answered it. "Mari?" "Dee." Marisol's voice comes through ragged, breathless, like she's running. "Dee, she's not here. Avery's not at the apartment. Priya says she walked her to the bus stop 20 minutes ago like always, and the bus came, and Avery never got on it, and nobody can find her." The phone nearly slips out of Delilah's hand. The entire diner seems to tilt sideways around her, the floor no longer entirely solid under her feet, and somewhere very far away she's aware of Ronan crossing the distance between them in 2 long strides, catching her elbow before her knees fully give out. "What happened?" he says, low and urgent, already reaching for his own phone with his free hand. "Avery's gone." Delilah's voice doesn't sound like her own anymore. It sounds like something hollowed out, scraped clean of everything except raw animal terror. "She's gone, Ronan. She never made it to the bus stop. She's 8 years old and she's gone. And this is happening because of you, because of whatever world you dragged back through that door. I'm calling everyone right now." He's already got the phone to his ear. His voice transformed into something Delilah's never heard from him before, hard and fast, and utterly without hesitation, barking orders to someone on the other end about pulling every available man, locking down every route out of the neighborhood, checking every camera within 6 blocks. The transformation is so complete, so instant, that for a moment Delilah simply stares at him, watching the boy she used to know disappear entirely behind the man who runs an empire, a man who's clearly done this before, coordinated chaos before. Moved through crisis with the cold efficiency of someone who's lost things he loved and refuses to lose them again. He hangs up, already moving toward the door, and turns back to her with an expression that's equal parts fury and devastation. Castellano's pulling every man we have. We'll have the whole neighborhood covered inside 10 minutes. I need you to think, Delilah. Anything unusual in the last few days? Anyone watching the school? Anyone asking questions about Avery? Anything at all? The phone call. It hits her like a physical blow, the memory surfacing through the panic. 3 nights ago, a man called the diner, said he was from the firm handling the building, said there'd been increased attention on the property and I should watch for anything unusual. Ronan's face goes rigid. Did he give a name? No. He said he wasn't at liberty to discuss it. That wasn't one of mine. Ronan's already moving again, phone back to his ear, voice low and clipped. Sal, pull every call that's come through the diner's line in the last week. I want a trace on every number. Yeah, right now. I don't care what time it is. Delilah watches him work, watches the cold competence of it, and something in her chest twists with an emotion she can't fully name, somewhere between gratitude and horror, because the same skills that make him terrifying are exactly the skills that might bring Avery home safe. The next 40 minutes pass in a blur that Delilah will never be able to fully reconstruct afterward. Marisol arriving at the diner in tears, Priya following close behind, hysterical with guilt, swearing up and down that Avery was right there 1 second and gone the next, that she only looked away to check her own phone, that she's so sorry, the words tumbling out useless and unable to undo anything. Ronan's men start arriving in unmarked cars, quiet, efficient, fanning out through the neighborhood with a coordination that would be impressive if Delilah had any room left in her to be impressed by anything. It's Castellano who brings the news, walking into the diner with his jaw set, a tablet in his hand, his eyes finding Ronan first before flicking, briefly, apologetically, to Delilah. We've got her on a traffic camera 2 blocks from the school, he says. Gray sedan. Plate's been run. Comes back to a shell company. Whose shell company? Ronan's voice has gone completely flat now, stripped of everything except focus. Castellano hesitates for half a second too long, and that hesitation tells Delilah everything before he even says the name. Costanzo's. The room seems to drop 10 degrees. Delilah's hand finds the counter again, gripping it so hard her fingers ache, and she watches Ronan's face transform into something she's never seen on a human being before, something that looks less like anger and more like a man watching the entire architecture of his life collapse in real time. He knows, Ronan says, mostly to himself, mostly disbelieving even as he says it. He knows we're closing in. He took her as leverage. There's more. Castellano's voice drops lower, like he's bracing himself before delivering the rest. We got a call routed through the old warehouse line 10 minutes ago. He wants to talk to you directly. Said if you bring federal agents or local police anywhere near this, or if you make a move with your own men beyond what he can already see, the girl... Castellano stops, glances at Delilah, clearly unwilling to finish the sentence in front of her. Say it, Delilah says, voice shaking but fierce. Say it. I need to hear exactly what he said. Castellano's eyes flick to Ronan for permission, and Ronan gives the smallest, most reluctant nod. He said the girl pays for whatever you've already dug up. That you have until midnight to walk away from the investigation, hand over everything you've collected, and swear it dies with you. Or she won't be coming home. The diner goes utterly silent. Even the coffee maker has finished its cycle, gone quiet, leaving nothing but the hum of the ancient refrigerator and the sound of Delilah's own ragged breathing filling the space between them. She looks at Ronan, really looks at him, past the empire, past the violence, past 12 years of grief and silence, and sees a man standing at the exact center of an impossible choice, the same impossible choice that's apparently defined every major moment of his entire life. Protect the world he built or burn it down completely for the people he loves. What are you going to do? She asks, and her voice has gone very quiet now, very still, the eye of her own internal storm. Ronan's jaw works once, twice, And when he finally speaks, his voice carries a kind of finality that makes the hair on the back of Delilah's neck rise. I'm going to burn every alliance I have left to the ground tonight, if that's what it takes to get her back. He's already moving toward the door, already pulling his phone back out, already barking new orders into it before he's even fully crossed the threshold. Sal, I want every man loyal to Costanzo identified and isolated by sundown. I want the federal contact we've been sitting on for insurance purposes activated tonight, whether I like the consequences or not. And I want... He stops mid-stride, mid-sentence, his whole body going rigid as his phone buzzes again, a new message lighting up the screen, and when he looks at it, his face drains of every last trace of color. What? Delilah says, already moving toward him, already bracing for whatever's about to come out of his mouth. Ronan, what is it? He turns the phone toward her with a hand that isn't quite steady, and on the screen is a single photograph. Avery, scared but unharmed, sitting in what looks like the back of a dim warehouse room, a folded note held up beside her face by a hand that isn't hers, the handwriting on it unmistakably the same as the envelope that started this entire morning. 4 words, exactly like before. She knew the truth too. The phone is still in Ronan's hand, the photograph of Avery still glowing on the screen, when Delilah grabs his wrist with both hands and squeezes hard enough that her nails dig crescents into his skin. She knew the truth too. Delilah reads the words out loud, like saying them might force some hidden meaning to surface, force the universe to explain itself. Who else knew the truth, Ronan? What does that mean? It means he's not just punishing you. Ronan's voice comes out low, gravel rough, the phone shaking slightly in his grip, even as his face stays terrifyingly still. It means he's telling me he knows Avery's seen something, or he thinks she has, or he wants me to believe she has, so I move faster, make a mistake. Either way, he's not bluffing about the timeline. Costanzo's never bluffed about anything in his life. It's the one trait I always respected in him. Respected. The word comes out of Delilah like acid. You respected the man who might have killed my sister and is currently holding my niece in some warehouse. I respected him before I knew what he was. Ronan finally looks up from the phone, and his eyes have gone past anger into something colder, something with no bottom to it. That respect just turned into something else entirely. Castellano's already moving, phone pressed to one ear, his other hand signaling 2 of the men who came in with him toward the door. We've got a partial trace on the warehouse line. Old shipping yard on the East Channel, building Costanzo's crew used to store overflow product back when his father ran the docks. If he's gone sentimental and used a place with history, that's our best lead. Best lead isn't a location, Ronan snaps. I need a location. You'll have one in 20 minutes if the trace holds. I don't have 20 minutes to spend standing in this diner. Ronan's already pulling his jacket straight, already transformed into something harder and faster than the man who walked through that door an hour ago, confessing his sins like a man laying down a weight he'd carried too long. He turns to Delilah, and for 1/2 second the hardness cracks, just enough that she sees the boy underneath it, the one who used to sit across from her in this very room with nothing to offer but honesty. I need you to stay here, with Marisol, with my men outside. I cannot do what I'm about to do and worry about you in the same breath. No. Delilah's voice doesn't waver. She's my niece. She's the only family I have left in this entire world, and I am not going to sit in a diner drinking burnt coffee while strangers decide whether she lives or dies. Delilah, you don't get to vanish on me twice, Ronan. The words come out of her like a blade, precise and merciless, and she watches them land exactly where she aimed them. You disappeared once, and let me believe you were dead for 12 years. You are not walking out that door without me and making that decision for me again. Something passes behind his eyes, recognition, maybe, or surrender, or both at once, and he doesn't argue further. He just nods once, short, and turns to Castellano. She's coming. Get her a vest. We move the second that trace confirms. The 20 minutes that follow feel like an hour, stretched thin and brittle. Delilah stands in the back room of the diner while one of Ronan's men, a quiet woman named Reyes, who handles the equipment with the casual efficiency of someone who's done this 100 times, fits a vest under Delilah's jacket and checks the straps twice. Delilah's hands won't stop shaking. She watches them as if they belong to someone else, fingers trembling against the counter's edge. And somewhere underneath the terror, there's a strange, sharp clarity she's never felt before in her life. The kind of clarity that comes when every other concern in the world burns away and there's only one thing left that matters. Marisol grips her shoulders before she leaves, forehead pressed briefly against Delilah's, no words exchanged because none are necessary. And then Delilah's moving out the back door into a gray morning that's somehow gotten colder in the last hour, climbing into the back of a black SUV beside Ronan, the door slamming shut with a sound that feels horribly final. "Trace confirmed," Castellano says from the front seat, already pulling out into traffic faster than the speed limit allows. "East Channel Warehouse, Building 7. We've got thermal showing 6, maybe 7 bodies inside, one of them small." Small. The word lodges itself in Delilah's chest like a hook. Small means Avery. Small means her niece is somewhere in a building full of armed men, and every second this car spends in traffic is a second too long. "How many men can we get there in time?" Ronan asks, voice flat, already calculating. 12, maybe 14 by the time we're in position. Costanzo's likely got more inside, plus whoever he's got on the perimeter. Then we don't go in loud. Ronan's jaw is tight, his hands flat on his knees in that same controlled stillness Delilah remembers from years ago. The stillness that always meant he was holding something enormous down by sheer force of will. "We go in smart. I want 2 men on the water side, 2 on the loading dock, and I want eyes confirming exactly where in that building they're holding her before anyone fires a single shot. If this turns into a firefight before we know her exact position, we could lose her in the crossfire." "Understood." Delilah stares out the window at the city sliding past, gray warehouses and chain-link fences and gulls wheeling over a channel the color of dishwater. And she thinks, with a kind of detached horror, about how ordinary all of it looks. How completely unaware the rest of the world is that somewhere in the middle of it, an 8-year-old girl who likes baking soda volcanoes and cartoon foxes is sitting tied to a chair in a warehouse because her mother saw something she wasn't supposed to see 8 years ago. "Tell me about him," she says abruptly, turning to Ronan. "Costanzo. If I'm walking into this, I need to understand who I'm dealing with." Ronan's quiet for a moment, like he's deciding how much honesty she can carry on top of everything else she's already absorbed this morning. He's smart, patient. He didn't survive 30 years in this business by being reckless. Every move he makes is calculated 3 steps ahead. He's not going to hurt Avery for sport. He's going to hurt her, or threaten to, only if it gets him exactly what he wants, which right now is me backing off and burying everything I've found. "And will you? Back off?" The question hangs in the air of the car for a long, heavy moment. Ronan looks at her, and there's something almost pleading in his face, like he needs her to understand the answer before he says it out loud. "I'll tell him whatever he needs to hear to get her out of that building safely," he says finally. But the second she's safe, there is no version of this world where that man draws breath as a free one. "I don't care what it costs me. I don't care if it costs me the entire organization. He's finished." Delilah doesn't answer. She just nods, once, and turns back to the window, watching the warehouses grow taller and more dilapidated as they near the water. The SUV stops 4 blocks short of the Target building, tucked behind a row of rusted shipping containers, and the next several minutes pass in a blur of quiet, urgent activity. Men checking weapons, Castellano relaying coordinates through an earpiece, Reyes pressing a small radio into Delilah's hand and showing her, fast and clipped, which button to press if she needs to call for help. Delilah's pulse is hammering so hard she can feel it in her teeth. "Stay behind me," Ronan says, voice low, close to her ear. "No matter what happens in there, you stay behind me. I will not survive losing you the same way I almost lost her. Do you understand me?" "I understand." Her voice comes out steadier than she feels. "Just get her back, Ronan. Whatever happens to me, whatever happens to you, just get her back." He doesn't answer that. He just looks at her for one long, charged second, like he's memorizing her face in case this is the last time he gets to see it. And then he turns and signals his men forward into the gray morning light. The warehouse looms ahead of them, corrugated metal walls streaked with rust. A single loading dock door standing half open like an invitation that's really a warning. Ronan's men move in pairs, fast and silent, fanning out toward the waterside and the loading dock exactly as planned, and Delilah finds herself pressed against a stack of pallets near the rear entrance, her heart slamming so loud she's certain it must be audible from 20 feet away. The first sound that breaks the silence isn't gunfire. It's a voice. Costanzo's voice, amplified through some kind of speaker system rigged inside the warehouse, calm and almost conversational, the voice of a man who has clearly been waiting for this exact moment. "Ronan, I see you've brought company." A pause, heavy with something that might be amusement. "Delilah Mercer. It's been a long time since I've seen you, though I suppose you wouldn't remember. You were just a kid working the register the last time I came through that diner with your father, God rest him, ordering coffee I never got around to paying for." Delilah's blood goes cold at the casual cruelty of it, the way he says her father's memory like it means nothing to him, like everything in this entire nightmare is just business as usual. "Where is she?" Ronan calls out, his voice carrying across the open warehouse floor with a hardness that makes Delilah's skin prickle. "Show me she's alive, Dominic. Right now." A long pause. Then, from somewhere deeper inside the building, a small voice, thin, scared, but unmistakably alive. "Aunt Dee?" Delilah's whole body moves before her mind catches up to the decision, lurching forward toward the sound, and it's only Ronan's arm snapping out to catch her across the chest that stops her from running directly into whatever's waiting beyond that loading dock door. "Avery, baby, I'm here," Delilah shouts, voice cracking wide open, all pretense of control gone. "I'm right here. I'm not leaving without you. Do you hear me?" "I'm scared." Avery's voice comes back, smaller now, wavering. "There's bad men here." "I know, baby, I know. I'm coming." "Are you?" Costanzo's voice cuts back in, amused, almost gentle in a way that's somehow worse than if he'd been shouting. "Because from where I'm standing, Ronan, it looks like you brought a woman with a vest and no training into the middle of a building full of men who've been doing this since before either of you were born. That's not a rescue. That's a second hostage." "Let her go and you can have me," Ronan says, and Delilah's heart stops at the words, at how easily, how readily he offers himself up. "Let both of them go. This is between you and me, Dominic. It always was. I know about the meeting 3 days before Caitlin Mercer died. I know your initials are on that contact log. I know you've spent 8 years making sure nobody ever connected those dots. And I know you're terrified of what happens to you the second I finish connecting them." Silence stretches out across the warehouse, long enough that Delilah can hear her own pulse roaring in her ears, can feel sweat sliding cold down the back of her neck despite the morning chill. "You think you've got it all figured out," Costanzo finally says, and something in his voice has shifted now, gone harder, more dangerous, the amusement burning away into something with teeth. "You think this is just me protecting a money trail? You poor, stupid boy. You really have no idea what you've been standing in the middle of this entire time, do you?" Ronan's jaw tightens visibly, even from where Delilah's standing. "Then enlighten me." "Your father didn't die because of a turf dispute, Ronan. That's the story I let you believe because a 16-year-old boy needed something simple to hold on to while he learned how to survive." Costanzo's voice carries an edge of something almost like pity now, twisted and cold. "Your father died because he found out things about this organization's foundations that nobody was ever supposed to find out. Caitlin Mercer found the exact same thread 8 years later, working in that financial office, pulling at the exact same loose stitch in the exact same fabric. I didn't kill her over a shipping discrepancy, you idiot. I killed her because she was 12 hours away from understanding something that would have brought this entire empire down to its foundations. The same thing your father found. The same thing that got him killed." The warehouse seems to tilt around Delilah. The floor no longer solid. Every certainty she's built over the last hour collapsing into something far larger and more horrifying than she'd let herself imagine. "What thing?" Ronan says, and his voice has gone very quiet now, very dangerous, the calm before something catastrophic. "What are you talking about, Dominic? You really want to know?" There's a sound now, footsteps, slow and deliberate, growing closer to the loading dock door, and Delilah realizes with a fresh jolt of terror that Costanzo is walking toward them, unhurried, completely unafraid. You want to know the truth your father died protecting, and the truth her sister died trying to expose? The loading dock door rolls open the rest of the way with a metal shriek, flooding the space with gray morning light. And there, standing in the doorway with a gun loose and almost casual in his hand, flanked by two armed men, is Dominic Costanzo. Silver-haired, immaculately dressed even now, his face carrying the kind of calm that only comes from a man who has never once in his life believed he could lose. Behind him, just visible through the gap of another doorway deeper in the warehouse, Delilah catches her first glimpse of Avery, small, terrified, tied to a metal folding chair but alive, breathing, her eyes finding Delilah's across the impossible distance between them, with a flash of desperate relief. "The organization your father built," Costanzo says, eyes fixed on Ronan, voice carrying easily across the warehouse floor, "was never just running drugs and shipping contracts, boy. It was laundering money for men whose names sit on the front pages of this city's newspapers, judges, councilmen, men who sit on the very federal task forces that are supposed to be hunting people like us. Your father found out who they were. He was going to expose them. That's why he died. And every single person who's tried to follow that same thread since, including apparently the dead woman's sister currently standing in my warehouse, has met the exact same end." The words hit Delilah like a physical blow, and for one horrifying second she sees her own death reflected in Costanzo's calm, satisfied expression, sees exactly how this calculation is going to play out in his mind. 3 loose threads, 1 warehouse, 1 very simple, very permanent solution. Ronan steps forward, putting himself fully between Delilah and the gun in Costanzo's hand, his voice dropping into something Delilah's never heard from him before, something that sounds less like a man and more like a verdict being read aloud. "You're going to let them both walk out of here," Ronan says, "or I promise you, on my father's grave, that I will burn this entire organization to the ground with my own hands before I let you leave this warehouse breathing." Costanzo's smile doesn't waver. He raises the gun, slow, deliberate, leveling it not at Ronan, but past him, directly at Delilah, and the entire world seems to narrow down to the small black circle of the barrel and the absolute terrifying certainty in the old man's eyes. "Brave words," Costanzo says, "for a man about to watch everyone he loves die in the same building. Time doesn't slow down the way people say it does. It speeds up, fractures into pieces too fast for thought, and Delilah will spend years afterward trying to reconstruct the order of what happened in those next 3 seconds, and never quite managing it. What she remembers is Ronan's body moving before his mind seemed to give the order, the full weight of him slamming into her, knocking her sideways behind the stack of pallets a half second before the gunshot cracks through the warehouse loud enough to make her ears ring white. What she remembers is hitting the concrete hard, the air punched out of her lungs, and the sound, not a scream, something worse than a scream, a short, choked grunt that comes from Ronan's throat as he goes down half on top of her. What she remembers is blood, a lot of it, fast, soaking through his shirt at the shoulder, and Ronan's hand finding hers in the chaos anyway, gripping it hard enough to bruise, his face gone gray-white, but his eyes still open, still fixed on her, still fighting to stay present even as his body wants to do something else entirely. "Stay down," he gasps, the words wet and strained. "Stay down! Stay down!" Gunfire erupts across the warehouse in earnest now, the careful silence of the last several minutes shattering into chaos. Castellano's voice shouting something through the comm in Delilah's ear, the thud of bodies and boots, the particular percussive violence of men who've trained their whole lives for exactly this moment. She can't see Avery anymore. That's the thought that claws its way to the top of her panic, louder even than the blood-soaking warm against her palm where she's pressing it instinctively to Ronan's shoulder. She can't see her niece, doesn't know if she's safe, doesn't know if the chaos exploding around them has put Avery in more danger instead of less. "Ronan, I have to get to her. Reyes has her." His voice is fading at the edges, but his grip on her hand doesn't loosen. "She went for Avery the second the first shot went off. That's the plan. That was always the plan. The second shooting starts, get the kid out, everything else is secondary." "You're not secondary." Delilah's voice cracks wide open, The careful control she's held onto through this entire impossible morning finally collapsing completely. Do you hear me? You don't get to be secondary. Not now. Not after everything. He almost smiles. It's a horrible thing to watch, blood at the corner of his mouth, his breathing gone shallow and fast, and still some stubborn piece of the boy she used to know fights its way up through the pain to curve the corner of his mouth. Took you 12 years to say something like that to me. Shut up. Shut up and stay awake. She's pressing both hands against the wound now, hard, the way she's seen on television 100 times without ever once believing she'd need to know how to actually do it, and beneath her palms she can feel his heartbeat, too fast, too thin, fluttering instead of pounding. The gunfire tapers off in stages. First a slowing, then scattered single shots, then, finally, an eerie quiet that feels almost louder than the chaos that preceded it. Footsteps approach fast, and Delilah's whole body goes rigid with fear until she recognizes Castellano's voice calling out, urgent, relieved, confirming the building's secure, confirming 3 of Costanzo's men are down and 2 more in custody, confirming, and this is the word that finally lets Delilah's lungs work again, that the girl is safe. Avery comes around the corner of the pallets a moment later in Reyes's arms, sobbing, reaching for Delilah the second she sees her, and Delilah catches her with one arm, while the other stays pressed hard against Ronan's shoulder, the 3 of them collapsing into a single trembling knot on the cold concrete floor. Aunt Dee, there's so much blood. I know, baby, I know. He's gonna be okay. Delilah doesn't know that, has no way of knowing that. But she says it anyway. The same automatic, desperate lie every frightened person tells the children in their care. And beside her, Ronan's eyes flutter, fighting to stay open, fighting to keep looking at her even as the warehouse starts to blur and tilt around the edges of his vision. Costanzo, he manages, the word barely more than breath. Down, Castellano says, kneeling beside them now, already pressing a radio to his ear, already shouting coordinates to someone for an ambulance. Took 2 rounds before he got the shot off at you. He's not getting back up, boss. It's over. Federal contact, Ronan grinds out. Even now, even bleeding out on a warehouse floor, still thinking 3 steps ahead like the man Delilah's only just beginning to understand him to be. Activate it. Everything, every file, every name, every account. I want it all in their hands before sundown, whether I make it through this or not. You're gonna make it through this. Castellano's voice carries an edge of something almost like fear, the first crack Delilah's seen in the big man's composure all morning. Ambulance is 4 minutes out. You're gonna make it, you hear me? So don't you dare talk like, just do it. Ronan's eyes finally close, not in surrender, Delilah understands somehow, but because the effort of keeping them open has finally exceeded what his body has left to give, and the last thing he manages before the darkness fully takes him is her name, barely audible, more breath than sound. The next several hours pass for Delilah in fragments. The ambulance ride. Sirens screaming through streets that seem to part for them like the whole city understands the stakes. The hospital waiting room with its fluorescent lights and vending machine coffee, and Avery curled asleep against her side, finally, mercifully, exhausted past the point of fear. Marisol arriving sometime past noon, pulling Delilah into a hug fierce enough to bruise, no questions yet. Just the simple animal comfort of someone who loves her standing solid in a world that stopped making sense. It's nearly 6 in the evening when a doctor finally emerges to tell her that Ronan Vescari is stable, that the bullet missed everything that would have killed him by a margin the surgeon describes, with visible disbelief as nothing short of miraculous, and that he's expected to make a full recovery given time and rest. Delilah sits down hard in the nearest waiting room chair when she hears it, her whole body finally allowing itself to shake, the dam she's been holding against an entire ocean of fear and grief and 12 years of unanswered questions finally breaking all at once. She doesn't cry pretty. She cries the way a person cries when they've been holding a structure upright with their bare hands for years and finally get to set the weight down. Ugly, gasping, her face pressed into Marisol's shoulder while Avery, awake again now, pats her back with small, solemn hands and tells her, with the strange wisdom children sometimes carry, that it's okay to cry when scary things are finally over. The weeks that follow unfold in a blur that Delilah will only fully piece together much later, once the dust settles enough to let her see the whole shape of what happened. The federal contact Ronan activated from a warehouse floor with 2 bullets worth of blood loss working against him turns out to be exactly as significant as he promised. A folder of evidence years in the making, financial records, contact logs, recorded conversations Ronan's organization had quietly compiled as insurance against exactly this kind of moment. All of it landing on federal desks within hours and triggering an investigation that will, over the following months, dismantle not just Costanzo's faction, but expose the judges, the councilmen, the supposedly untouchable men whose names had been hiding behind shell companies and shipping manifests for over a decade. Ronan testifies from a hospital bed at first, then later from a series of closed federal hearings that Delilah isn't permitted to attend, but hears about secondhand, in fragments, from Castellano, who visits the diner more often than Delilah expects. Always quiet, always polite, always carrying news that makes the picture a little more complete. Ronan doesn't fight the investigation, doesn't hide behind lawyers or technicalities the way Delilah half expects a man in his position to. He hands over everything, every account, every name, every thread of an empire it took him 12 years to build, and walks toward the consequences of that decision with the same flat, unflinching resolve she watched him carry into a warehouse full of armed men. It costs him almost everything. Most of his assets get seized or surrendered as part of his cooperation agreement. Men who once called him boss with genuine fear in their eyes now either sit in federal custody themselves or have scattered to whatever corners of the world still feel safe for men running from a collapsing empire. The name Vescari, once spoken in this city with the particular hush reserved for things people are afraid will hear themselves discussed, starts to fade instead into something smaller, something almost ordinary. A man recovering from a gunshot wound, cooperating with federal investigators, slowly, deliberately walking away from the only kind of power he's ever known. Delilah visits him in the hospital twice before he's discharged, both times brief, both times strange and careful, the two of them circling each other with the particular caution of people who've said too much and not enough in the same conversation. It's the third visit, 2 weeks after the warehouse, that finally cracks something open between them. She finds him sitting up in bed, color back in his face, a stack of legal documents spread across his lap that he sets aside the moment she walks in, like nothing in the room matters more than her presence. Avery wanted to come, Delilah says, hovering near the doorway, suddenly unsure of where to put her hands. She made you a card, insisted on drawing a dinosaur on it for reasons she would not explain. I'd like to see it, whenever she's ready. Something in his voice carries real warmth at the mention of the kid, something that makes Delilah's chest tighten in a way she doesn't fully trust yet. How is she doing? Better than I expected. Kids are strange that way, resilient in ways that terrify me a little. Delilah finally crosses the room, sits in the chair beside his bed, the same chair she's sat in twice before without quite managing to say what she actually came to say. She asked me last night if you're a bad guy or a good guy. I didn't have a good answer for her. Ronan's quiet for a moment, looking down at his own hands resting on the blanket. What did you tell her? I told her the truth, that you did bad things for reasons that made sense to you at the time, and that you're spending everything you have left trying to undo as much of it as you can. Delilah's voice carries no judgment in it, just a kind of exhausted honesty that feels like the only currency she has left after the last 2 weeks. I told her that doesn't erase what you did, but it might mean something different about who you're choosing to be now. That's more grace than I've earned. Probably. Delilah almost smiles, the first real almost smile she's managed in days. I'm not handing it to you for free, Ronan. I want you to understand that. 12 years of silence and a lifetime of secrets don't get fixed because you took a bullet for me in a warehouse, however much that mattered in the moment. I need you to actually become the person you're claiming you want to be. Slowly. Provably. Not because you're trying to win something back from me, but because it's the right thing regardless of whether I'm watching. I know. He meets her eyes, steady despite the IV line still taped to the back of his hand, despite the visible exhaustion still etched into his face. I'm not asking you to forgive 12 years in a hospital room, Delilah. I'm not even sure I'm asking for forgiveness at all. I just didn't want to spend whatever time I have left lying to you the way I lied by omission for over a decade. That's the only thing I can promise right now. No more silence, no more deciding things on your behalf because I've convinced myself it's protection. It's not a resolution. Not really. Not the kind of clean, complete answer either of them might have wanted in a different, simpler version of this story. But it's honest. And after everything, honest feels like more than either of them had any right to expect. The diner reopens fully 3 weeks after the warehouse. Marisol running the floor with a fierce protective energy that Delilah's grateful for, even when it borders on overbearing, Earl Hutchins back in his booth complaining about the coffee being too hot now, instead of the heater being too cold, the ordinary rhythms of the place slowly, stubbornly reasserting themselves over the wreckage of what almost happened. It's 6 months later, on a quiet evening after the dinner rush has cleared and the last booth has emptied out, that Ronan walks through the diner's front door for what Delilah will later count as the 100th time since the hospital. Though this visit carries a different weight than the ones before it, something in the careful, deliberate way he crosses the room toward the counter where she's wiping down the same cracked vinyl that's seen the entire arc of both their lives. He's thinner than he used to be. The months of legal proceedings and federal depositions and the slow grinding work of dismantling everything he built having carved something leaner and quieter into his face. The cooperation agreement closed for good 2 weeks ago. No charges, full immunity in exchange for testimony that put away 11 men, including 3 former city officials. The kind of outcome that surprised everyone except, Delilah suspects, Ronan himself, who seemed to know from the very beginning exactly what he was willing to trade for the chance at an ordinary life. He doesn't say anything at first, just reaches into his jacket pocket and sets something down on the counter between them. Small, metal, old, the edges worn smooth from years of handling. Delilah looks down and feels her breath catch. It's the diner key, the same one she pressed into his palm the summer she was 16, told him solemnly that it meant he could always come back, day or night, whenever the world outside got too heavy to carry alone. She'd assumed for 12 years that he'd lost it, or thrown it away, or simply forgotten it existed along with everything else about the life he left behind. "You kept this," she says, very quietly. "I kept it the whole time." His voice carries none of the careful control she remembers from the warehouse, none of the cold efficiency of the man who once ran an empire. It's just honest now, raw in a way that makes her chest ache. "Every city I hid in, every name I used, every year I spent telling myself I'd done the right thing leaving you behind, I kept this in my pocket the entire time. Some nights it was the only thing that reminded me there used to be a version of my life that wasn't about survival. That there was a place once that felt like it might have been home, if I'd been brave enough to stay in it." Delilah picks the key up, turns it over in her fingers, feeling the same worn grooves she remembers from a lifetime ago, back when the worst thing either of them had to worry about was whether her father would notice the diner's books didn't quite balance because she kept giving Ronan free pie. "I should have come back sooner," he says, the words coming slow, deliberate, like he's been rehearsing them for months and still can't quite make them sound adequate to the weight they're carrying. Not just after the file landed on my desk. Before that, years before that. I told myself staying away was protecting you, and maybe in the beginning that was even partly true, but somewhere along the way it just became easier than facing what I'd have to admit if I ever did walk back through that door. I'm sorry it took your sister's case forcing my hand to finally bring me back here instead of just wanting to come back enough on my own. Delilah's eyes sting, and this time she doesn't fight it. Doesn't push the feeling down the way she spent 12 years pushing every difficult feeling down just to keep functioning. She sets the key down gently on the counter between them, reaches out and covers his hand with hers. "You did," she says, and her voice breaks gently on the words. Not from grief this time, but from something warmer, something that's taken 6 months of careful, deliberate rebuilding to finally feel solid enough to stand on. "You came back, late and broken, and dragging half a lifetime of things you should have told me years sooner. But you came back, Ronan. That has to count for something." Outside, the diner's neon sign flickers against the deepening blue of early evening, the same stuttering sea that's greeted every sunrise and sunset for over a decade, Except now it's been repaired. Ronan's doing, quiet and unannounced, like so many of his gestures over the past 6 months. And it burns steady now, unbroken, casting a warm, constant light across the gravel lot where a black car once sat for 20 minutes, while a frightened, grieving man tried to find the courage to walk through a door he'd been avoiding for 12 years. Avery comes barreling out of the back office where she's been doing homework, sliding to a stop when she sees Ronan, her face lighting up in the unguarded, total way only children manage. "You came on a Tuesday. You said Tuesdays were boring grown-up days." "I decided boring grown-up days needed more dinosaurs in them," Ronan says, and the smile that breaks across his face is the most unguarded Delilah's seen since this entire impossible story began. Since a black car sat outside a diner and a man who used to be a king finally chose, after everything, to become something quieter, something smaller, something that fits inside the four walls of a roadside diner where the coffee's always a little too strong and the past, finally, has stopped being something either of them has to carry alone. Caitlin's case closes for good that autumn, the last of Costanzo's network, sentenced in a federal courtroom 3 states away, and Delilah scatters a handful of wildflowers at her sister's grave the following weekend, telling her, quietly, that it's finished, that the truth finally got the daylight it deserved, that Avery's growing up surrounded by people who'll fight for her now, instead of people who'll let her down. The diner never closes again after that. Some nights the bell over the door rings for nothing more than Ronan walking in to share a slice of pie nobody asked him to order, settling into the same booth he sat in as a frightened 17-year-old, watching Avery argue with Marisol about whether ketchup belongs on eggs, watching Delilah move through the room she built with her own 2 hands, finally, completely, without anything left between them but the ordinary, unremarkable, hard-won peace of 2 people who survived everything that tried to keep them apart and chose, every single day after, to stay.